Welcome to Fantasy Football Today Dynasty. I am your host, Heath Cummings, here today with a very special guest. We've got Matt Olson from 32 Beat Writers. You can find him on Twitter at Matt Olson FF. Matt, tell everybody what you've been working on recently and where they can find your work.
Sure. So first of all, thanks for having, myself and that extension of the 32 Beat Writers team on. It's been a heck of an off season already. I was just having the conversation of, this is our time of year. I know you guys really ramp up, right before week one. That's when we go on vacation. So we're really excited to be working through coming kind of out of the backside of OTAs and starting to see a lot of, I don't want to say what could happen or what ifs, but this is what happened in rookie camp. This is what we saw in OTAs. And now, we're getting to the meat of and getting into training camp. And I think this is where we start to, really get to see what rookies are coming into their form, what veterans are starting to emerge that might be on a new team or so on and so forth. So, we want to start to get to the meat and excited to do so.
Yeah, that's what we're going to do today. We're a couple of weeks away for some teams getting training camp started. Mm-hmm. We've got all the information that we're going to get from OTAs. And so we're going to kind of go over those things, prepare you for training camp, tell you what we're looking for, tell you what we've learned in the last couple of months. I'm looking forward to doing it. We always start each show with 3 questions for our guest. And Leaf Green Goblin in the YouTube chat basically asks one of the questions I was going to ask. How do I know who's lying to me? He says. And one of the questions I had here is like, you guys see a lot of coach speak, it's coming through the beat writers. Some of it's just like projections from beat writers. Do you have any suggestions for fantasy managers as to how to parse that information out and separate the actionable stuff from the stuff that we're all going to be joking about in December?
Sure. So, this is something that we do as a team daily because it truly does kind of separate the fact from the fiction. And one of the ways we love to do it and kind of how we've been successful with it is you obviously take coach speak. No one will tell you that it's 100% accurate. And if they do, then, just go with that and tell them, sure, you want to believe that, go die on that hill. But we like to say, if a coach says X and the beat writer says X, and then we see it collectively, either in the future or we saw it previously, then we know where there's smoke, there's fire. Right. We're never going to be 100%. I hate to say that. I think anyone in the fantasy community, if someone was 100%, you'd probably be a rich man.
They certainly wouldn't be telling you their advice. They would just be using it for themselves. So yeah, that idea of like, I think it does help to look at like, what has he said in the past and what happened then? And like, is there any connection at all between those two things? And there are certain things that a coach says, and even the beat writer's kind of like, yeah, I don't know if he actually meant that. And so you just kind of have to, that combination of coach and beat writer and then past history.
Exactly.
A great way to know. Of course, this is a dynasty fantasy football show. So one of the things I always ask people who are first time on the show, you're starting a new dynasty fantasy football league tomorrow. What is your one non-negotiable rule or setting? And you can't say super flex because everybody says that.
No, sure. It's funny. I found a new hill to die on.
Oh, good.
For this question this year. And I thought about it for a bit. And my biggest one that if I was going to do it all over, which I probably don't have the opportunity to ever do, but I would do points per first down. I love the mentality around it. I like rewarding good play. We're having this conversation and someone's like, if, you're 3rd and 10 and the running back gets a dump off and he gets 4 yards and you're playing half PPR, well, you basically just got a full point. Right. You're doing nothing of value on the football field. But if it's that same scenario and he picks up the first down, well, that's a hell of a play. So we should reward that, thus good football. So kind of looking at it that way, and maybe that's not so much 100% a dynasty scenario. I think it'd be awesome across a lot of
No,
leagues.
I love that. My favorite is probably half PPR and half point per first down. You can go full PPR and full point per first down, but then you run into a messy situation with the quarterbacks, and we're seeing that in Scott Fishbowl. You know, I was this past weekend in Kansas City for my live Scott Fishbowl draft, and when I was going through my projections, I know you're drafting this week in Nashville.
Yep.
So I'll tell you what I found was the way that Scott set up the scoring. He did such a good job of, like, you can make a case for almost anybody because we've got the tight end premium, we've got the super flex, we've got the quarter point per rush attempt, like all these things. The one guy who got left out in the cold this year, according to my projections, are those pocket passers, because when you reward rushing first downs and the quarterback scoring is not that high, then you do see that those rushing quarterbacks are really getting an extra edge. But that's kind of the way the NFL is moving right now.
Sure.
Anyway, so I'm okay with that. Question number 3. What's the one thing that matters more than anything else over the next 6 weeks?
Position battles.
Yeah.
That's probably like the cheesiest segue ever. But it's 100% what it comes down to. I mean, we've seen so many scenarios of guys who we think had a great OTA. A lot of people can do a lot of things wearing shorts.
Yeah.
Hell, I could probably look like a somewhat competent football player. You know, if someone wasn't about to deck me when I caught the ball. You know, you see more, especially agile guys, you know, those Calvin Austin kind of players.
I think the prime example, and one of the footballers tweeted about this last week, is Julian McLaughlin. Like, has been, by all reports, the best running back in shorts this summer.
Sure.
And he had tweeted out all of the video of Julian McLaughlin's touches in pads last year. And it was a lot of him getting tackled right at the line of scrimmage or the behind the line of scrimmage, because football is a lot harder, it turns out, when people are allowed to hit you.
Yeah, it's funny how that works, huh?
Well, that's awesome stuff. We're going to jump into the stuff we learned in OTAs right after this first break. We are back, and I want to, I was looking at some of the stuff that you guys have put out over the last month or so, and there were a couple of things that I thought, man, I wonder if I should change my projections on that. And so I want to start with the Commanders running back reports. Looking at some of the stuff that you guys had on your site and out on Twitter, it really sounds like people might be underestimating Brian Robinson right now.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly feel bad for Brian Robinson. Like, there's no one worse that could have come in to be, unfortunately, we have to call it a 1B as of now. I don't know how you can just fully discount Eckler. I know he had really awful yards per carry, last year. But, Brian Robinson, from his rookie year, he averaged 0.8 receptions a game. He worked his ass off that offseason and now averages 2.4 receptions this past year. That's a significant increase. He wanted to get more involved in the passing game. He wanted to keep that as part of his, arsenal and be that guy. So what does Washington do? They go out and they get the one guy, maybe not the one guy, but a player that can catch a pass in every given scenario out of the backfield. And we recently saw Ben Standig, and I'm going to go through a couple beat writers that we love and follow, and you all should too, because they do incredible work. But Ben recently projected, and this is as of now, that Eckler could see 8 to 12 touches a game, and that's semi-petrifying for a Brian Robinson owner.
But I think that, like, the and you might be burying the lead here a little bit. I think there's a lot of people that are listening right now who came into the idea that Brian Robinson was Austin Eckler's 1B. And what you guys are hearing is, like, Eckler's main role is going to be in the passing game. Most of the rushing work, and certainly I would think the work inside the 5-yard line, is going to be Brian Robinson's.
I mean, you have to imagine that's the case. I even put in the notes here that 8 to 12 touches, a touch could be a target, essentially, in this case. I from what we've seen, from what we know, I don't know to 12 true touches is a realistic scenario. But, I mean, Jaden Daniels is a rookie QB. We know that checkdowns are a very real thing. We know that just any play to pick up some positive yards, heck, I'd love to swing it to a guy that I've seen do it time after time and pick up that first down so we can continue this drive. So, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there with that.
So I would say, like, the thing that makes me think is because we haven't seen Cliff Kingsbury's running back target rate generally be that high. We don't usually see rookie quarterbacks, and particularly rookie quarterbacks that are going to run like Jaden Daniels, throw to their running backs that much. I look at ADP, and this makes me say I want 0% of Austin Eckler. And Brian Robinson, who's going to the double-digit rounds right now, seems like a great value because there's that contingent upside. And we saw it with Robinson last year. I think he had 9 targets in a game that Antonio Gibson missed. Austin Eckler is an older back who was really ineffective last year. If Eckler has something that goes wrong, we could absolutely see Brian Robinson go from, man, he's really better in non and half PPR because he never catches the ball, to all of a sudden, oh, yeah, we've got a workhorse running back. That would be pretty fantastic and more in line really with what we've seen from Kingsbury. Not a lot of 2-back approaches for him. He came into the league. We thought, man, he's going to be so great for the wide receivers. And he's had some really elite stretches for running back touchdowns and production, pretty run heavy in the red zone. So good stuff there on the Commanders running back reports. I want to go to another team, and it's Kingsbury's old team. It's the Arizona Cardinals. You know, James Conner, like Austin Eckler, getting up there in age. We don't think he probably has too much longer left. Unlike Austin Eckler, when James Conner was healthy last year, he was awesome. Now they go and draft Trey Benson. They've got both of those guys in the backfield. What are you guys expecting, and what are you hearing out of that Arizona backfield?
So let's get the elephant out of the room first, and that James Conner never plays a full football season. He's averaging about 12.8 games a year. So you're gonna see Trey Benson featured at some point this year. I don't want to speak in absolutes, but the track record shows that he's going to be the primary back on the field at some point this year. That being said, and this actually, very recently came out from Johnny Venerable over at PHX Cardinals. He said that he doesn't expect a great return on investment for dynasty owners for year one of Trey Benson. This is going to be James Conner's backfield until it's not. Now, James Conner's in the last year of his contract. That he's getting $7 million a year. He's probably not going to resign for $7 million a year anywhere. But to your point earlier, when he's on the field, he's produced. There's no reason to expect anything less than what we saw based off of the O-line upgrades, based off of the offense not really changing too much in what they're trying to do. We saw a lot of passing scenarios that Conner was involved in. So, when you kind of put all those things together, I still think James Conner is a great pick. And I think he's getting discredited and probably discounted because of the drafting of Trey Benson.
I think that's what people are worried about is what we just talked about with Washington. Like Conner in Dynasty, his value is pretty much only for somebody who's contending this year, has no expectations for him beyond next year. Well, when you're going as a contender going to buy one of those older running backs, you want him to be someone who's really going to dominate touches like Conner has throughout his career. And I think people saw the Benson pick and they thought, oh no, this is going to turn into a 50-50 split. And then Trey Benson's going to take the job from him. And I think more of what we're hearing is it's probably going to be James Conner as the lead running back. And then if something happens to James Conner, when something happens to James Conner, we'll see Trey Benson as the lead running back. And Benson might be one of those guys, if you didn't draft him in rookie drafts, that in October, November, you can acquire him for less because they're still very optimistic about Benson once Conner is no longer around, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you don't draft someone like that with when you have that veteran in the last year of their contract. Like the writing is on the wall in this scenario. I don't think it gets any more clear. So, yeah, we'll see what happens with that. But I expect a good year from James Conner.
I want to move over to the wide receiver rooms because being attached to Josh Allen as a wide receiver when they just dealt away the guy that got 170 targets a year sounds pretty awesome. Like we would really like to find a Bills wide receiver to roster. And I think a lot of people, when they saw Keon Coleman go early in round 2 of the NFL draft, that made him a round 1 pick in some rookie drafts, definitely no later than early in round 2 of rookie drafts. And I think they're hoping that he can be one of those rare rookies that comes in and is just a fantasy starter from year 1. What are we hearing about how the Bills view that receiver room now that they've got Khalil Shakir, a holdover from last year? They drafted Keon Coleman. They added Curtis Samuel, who, by the way, was with the offensive coordinator in Carolina a few years ago. And then they also added Marquez Valdez-Scantling, I guess I should say. But no, like, how are they looking at that wide receiver room right now?
So I think the Keon Coleman pick was awesome because, and I was a believer in when he was in college. I got a little nervous during the combine, kind of some of that. He was projected a lot to Dallas, which could have been intriguing as well. But the one thing that I love about Coleman and that I think sticks out is that he is a true down the field threat. In an offense at FSU that didn't feature that regularly, Bills Wire just actually put out the numbers on that, and he caught 8 out of 24 targets for an offense that only threw, or down the field targets, deep targets, and an offense that only threw that ball one or two times a game. So you have this guy, and if anyone has forgotten, Josh Allen likes to sling it down the field.
Right.
So you have this guy who has this ability to go up and get the ball. I'm not going to say he's just going to be out there running streaks. He's capable of other stuff from what we've seen. But man, do we love a deep threat? Do we love Josh Allen throwing that deep threat the ball? Yeah, absolutely. There's no one else in this offense currently that's going to take on that role.
Right.
So we have that, scenario in play there with Keon Coleman. And then you alluded to it with Curtis Samuel. I said, I put it here, my most intriguing wide receiver on this roster is Curtis Samuel. He obviously shared Joe Brady in 2020. For those who don't remember that wonderful experience, he produced 851 yards and 3 touchdowns and also 40 carries, which is, we saw in training camp last year, and I'm looking forward to it this year if we see it again. We saw Dalton Kincaid lining up in the backfield. So if you see Curtis Samuel lining up in the backfield and see that reported, you should get excited because it means that we're possibly seeing that recreation, which should lead to good things.
Do you think we've seen, because generally speaking, that deep threat like Keon Coleman, sure, they can score 15 points on one play, but they're also not usually the target leader. And rookies are often not the target leader on their team. You think it's probably a better bet that Curtis Samuel leads this team in targets this year than Keon Coleman, or is that just going to be Dalton Kincaid?
After Dalton Kincaid's season last year, that's where I was leaning. But this is an ugly scenario in that regard. I was just not trying to segue too quickly.
Yeah.
But it's like the Patriots set up this year. It's like the Packers set up last year. No Packer was reliable at all because you had no idea who was getting the ball
on a week-to-week basis, right?
And I think it's going to take, outside of Dalton Kincaid, it's going to take a couple weeks to see what the offense, what their pattern is and how they attack different teams. To your point, Coleman's probably going to be, there's going to be a lot of bust weeks most likely.
Right. He
is still a rookie. He does obviously have a big body to go up and get the ball, which I think is what the Bills are banking on. But, if the Bills are having a tough time moving it, they're not going to be slinging it down the field as much as they were last year when they had Diggs and Gabe Davis to go get it.
I think that Gabe Davis is probably a good name to bring up because before everybody turned on Gabe Davis last year and before everybody overhyped Gabe Davis the year before, the guy that Gabe Davis was, where he could have those monster games and then he could disappear for a few weeks, but it was often in that 5 to 7 target per game range. I think that's probably the upside for Keon Coleman this year, is he hope he can be that Gabe Davis from 2 or 3 years ago that turns into wide receiver 30. But it's through a collection of top 12 weeks and wide receiver 100 weeks. Maybe somebody that you enjoy a little bit more in best ball. Another guy, though, like Trey Benson, who might be a good buy when we get to October, November, December, if he gets off to a slow start. You kind of referenced it. We've got another AFC East receiving core that we want to talk about. Unfortunately, not tied to Josh Allen. In fact, this rookie season may be tied to Jacoby Brissett for a while and then Drake May. But who has been the best Patriots wide receiver this offseason, and who do they really seem to be favoring right now?
So one of the great things about the Patriots in general is that they do not close the door to anyone. So you do get a lot of Patriot coverage, which has helped kind of dissect this. That being said, you've probably seen things like, oh, Keyshawn Butte is having a great practice. And it's like, oh my goodness, he's going to do something this year. Right. Like, we always, and they clearly brought in 2 guys this year. I don't think if they had that big of question marks, they would have done so. You have Juju Smith-Schuster still there, falling to kind of out of favor. So, we do have these QBs linked to quarterbacks that might not be the best for them. That being said, everything we've seen so far is Pop Douglas leading the pack potentially. I think a big part of that is Kendrick Bourne hasn't been participating. Right. So anytime, and that's not to go too far off topic here, but anytime you see players who have expected roles not participating in OTAs, whether it be early on training camp, whatever, you're just opening up opportunity for someone to step up and kind of not capture the job per se, but cut into it a bit. So that's where I think Polk is probably your next guy. I think,
right.
Baker, I love. I think the guy's got some swagger about him. He's if no one can figure it out, because I can't say I am from the Boston area originally. Yeah. But I do love the kid's work ethic. But if I'm banking on someone and I'm investing, it's Pop Douglas and Jalen Polk as of now.
I think that reference you made to Kendrick Bourne not being present is a big one, because the first half of last year, Kendrick Bourne was by far the best wide receiver on the Patriots. He got hurt, and Pop Douglas, Demario Douglas, moved right into that role and averaged 7 targets a game and was pretty much the best wide receiver the rest of the way. I know people, especially dynasty fantasy football managers, don't want to hear anything about 30-year-old Kendrick Bourne or Juju Smith-Schuster or KJ Osborne. Like, they want to hear about Jalen Polk. They want to hear about Baker. They want to hear about Demario Douglas. It does sound like, from everything we're hearing so far, though, Douglas is still ahead of the rookies, right?
100%. I mean, he's still pretty young. And all these guys are working with new quarterbacks. So that's another issue with the Bourne scenario. You're also seeing tons of reports about, May, Baker, and Polk all being the first ones at practice and the last ones to leave. There's several tweets, footage, whatever you want to allude to out there, but they're just working together nonstop. So when that May time does come, right, those guys could be pretty intriguing.
But I didn't mention this before the show, but I think you probably have the answer pretty readily available. Like, we're not expecting Drake May to be the starter for the first game of the season, and probably not for the first month of the season, right?
It's funny. We keep seeing it teased, like, oh, if he, lights it up in training camp. I don't see Gerard Mayo doing that. Everything I've seen about Mayo is that he is, I don't want to say ultra conservative, but he does come from a 20-year history of conservative coaching, gameplay, all of that. So, I can see him letting Brissett do his thing. Now, if Brissett stumbles out of the gate, the fans are going to come for it. Everyone's going to come for it. Fantasy owners, right? Some probably will be sad if they have Brissett, but he's not. There's a chance it doesn't happen this year, but there's
you'd say more likely Jacoby Brissett starts all year than Drake May starts week 1?
100%.
Yeah, that's kind of the way I've been leaning as well. And like I said, listen, we're expecting a pretty run-heavy approach. We're going to see a lot of handoffs to Ramondre Stevenson. We're going to need, if one of those wide receivers is going to be, and the other thing we're going to see is we're going to see more tight end screens, more shots to the tight end with Alex Van Pelt as the offensive coordinator, which could be good for Hunter Henry. All of that comes down to say, like we just mentioned, maybe 7 New England Patriots wide receivers. One of those guys has to dominate targets for them to matter even a little bit. And so the guys that we want to invest in are the guys who could matter later in the year or in the future when Drake May takes over. And those 3 names, Demario Douglas, Jalen Polk, Javon Baker, those are the 3 guys that you want to roster on that team, but you probably don't want to invest too much. Let's kind of shift gears from what we've seen so far to what we're going to see over the next 6 to 7 weeks. And I think the first question that's probably on everybody's mind, that's not going to be something that we see on the field, but have we gotten any indication or heard anything on the Rashee Rice situation? Still Unsure if he's going to be dealing with a suspension this year or if that's going to get pushed to next year. Really unsure about where that's going in terms of the criminal case.
Yeah, and it's interesting that this came up because Matt Derrick actually just put out an article about this morning and kind of all the possibilities that we could be seeing. And I think the key words that are there is this year. Yeah. Because right now it's an open case. And I'm sure Rashee Rice wants to keep it that way. Now, if you're the Kansas City Chiefs, you want to know what's going to happen. Absolute worst case scenario is a midseason suspension. I think there's a strong possibility it does get pushed to next season. However, a big part of this too, and I don't want to say they're overly related, but Cameron Sutton just did get suspended 8 games for a misdemeanor. We have to remember that Rashee Rice is being charged with a felony. Now, I know Roger Goodell has such a clear and concise way of suspending people that I'm sure all those things, come into play. But something is going to happen to Rashee Rice. If I had to bet, I'm going to say his team tries to drag it out if we get to training camp because we don't want to see anything happen this year. I would guess it's coming next year, but that's 100% a guess. And I just based off of what we know as of today.
I think that's the main takeaway from all this is that we don't have the news yet. Right now, I've seen some speculation that Rashee Rice is going to make more money next year than he's going to make this year. So he might rather have the suspension done this year. But there's been precedent in the past for Roger Goodell putting a player who has an open case that's a felony case on the exempt list until that's resolved. We've not heard anything about that yet. We're all pretty much still drafting blind. We've talked on this show in the past from a dynasty perspective. If you're looking at the long term, Rice probably a buy right now. I think Marquise Brown definitely a buy right now. And I don't really, the Rice thing is not going to impact my feeling of Patrick Mahomes at all. It's not like last year where the wide receiver options besides Rashee Rice were just inadequate. It's a nice way to say it.
Yeah, that was good.
Marquise Brown is there now. Xavier Worthy's there now. Travis Kelce should be healthy. I wouldn't worry too much about this from the Mahomes perspective. From a dynasty manager specifically, it might be like we've talked about Rice as a buy, and I think he is. If you're a true contender, you might be on the other side of that. It might be better to just go get some production that you can absolutely count on this year because, we're sitting here in what is now, I would guess, mid-July, and we have no indication and no new information that's come in yet. What I would really love for all these dynasty managers is if that changed by the time this podcast comes out. Like that'd be fantastic for everybody. Let's talk about something that we might actually know about. The rookie quarterbacks battling for jobs. We pretty much covered Drake May. I think we can cover the next 2 guys pretty quickly and pretty easily. Any chance at all that Caleb Williams or Jaden Daniels, either one, don't start week 1?
Those 2, no.
Yeah.
You got to roll them out there. You surrounded them with at least something to be productive, especially in Chicago. My goodness. I don't know. I don't think we've seen a rookie QB come into a situation like we have in Chicago in quite some time. I know the guys that over at 32 Beat Writers, I've been banging on since before the draft that whoever goes to Minnesota, and I wanted them to get a QB, is going also into a great scenario.
Yes.
And I that McCarthy situation, yes, Sam Donald's looked great in quite a few off seasons recently. It hasn't led to a ton of on the field production, but he most likely is going to start in Minnesota, if not 100%. But that'll be probably a shorter leash depending on what McCarthy does here in training camp. But how can you not love getting the chance to throw to Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, Jordan Addison? That's a pretty powerful lineup right there.
And I think that is a kind of a good transition point there because like we've got on one end of the spectrum, Caleb and Jaden Daniels that we know we're 95% sure they're starting week 1. And we've got another situation, Drake May, who neither one of us really think there's much of a chance he's going to start early in the season. And there's a real risk that he doesn't start all season if Jacoby Brissett can just be average or if May doesn't quite pick things up as quick as they're hoping. McCarthy is a younger prospect. They do have Darnold, who probably fits in that Jacoby Brissett model, maybe a little bit more mistake prone. But besides that, would you, like I asked you on May, is it more likely that he sits all year or starts week one? And you were really quick to say it's more likely he sits all year. Are you the same place on McCarthy, or is that more of a coin flip where you think it's more likely he starts week one than sits all year?
No, I think it's more likely he sits all year. I hate to say that, but
yeah,
I will throw the slight disclaimer, and I expect to see JJ McCarthy starting a football game this year, 100%. I don't know what that exact point is as of right now, and that is why we're having these conversations, right? About training camp and what we're going to see. That is a huge question that should get some kind of answer as we get into the next few weeks.
I want to kind of look at some injury situations, and you and I talked about this before the show, and kind of like the Rashee Rice situation, like we just don't really know. We've not gotten a lot of information on Jonathan Brooks, TJ Hawkinson, Mike Williams, Aaron Rodgers, like how they're doing in their recoveries from their injuries. So I guess, are there any types of warning signals or just maybe positive signals that you're looking for on these injured players as we start training camp, as we get to the preseason, that type of thing?
The first thing you want to see, like being very realistic, we're probably not going to see these guys in a ton of drills, right? Let's just put that out there. But we want to see them. We want to beat right to be like, hey, Mike Williams is working off to the side. He's there. He's in the meetings. He's not so hampered that he can't be present. So I think that's kind of the biggest tell on what's going on. If the guy is present, he's not a DNP.
Right.
He's out there. If he's jogging, I'm happy, right?
Right.
Especially for a lot of these guys. We're coming off some kind of leg injury or whatnot. You want to see them out there with their team, not necessarily in pads and whatnot. We did allude to it before the show. Aaron Rodgers and Kirk Cousins, we might never see till week one.
Right.
Now, if it's light practice, 7-on-7s, you might see them get mixed in there. We've seen that through OTAs. But full pads, man, if I'm the Jets, I'm not taking the chance again.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's like, I think you got it right. Like at the first day of camp, it'd be great if they're just there and doing something off to the side. Mm-hmm. The second thing I would say is I'd like to see progress. If we get to week 3 of camp and Mike Williams is still jogging on the side, I'm not going to like that very much. The red flag I would look for is when they go backwards. Mm-hmm. Or we had it with Kevin Stefanski last year where he almost seemed a little bit irritated or grumpy about the fact that Deshaun Watson was not participating or not going to be playing that week. And so if it seems like a coach is trying to send a message to a player, that gets me in a little bit of concern. One of my takeaways from Kevin, I wonder if you've noticed this is true or think I'm just blowing smoke, which I often am. I take negative coach speak more seriously than I take positive coach speak.
There's a lot more passion and negativity. I hate to say that.
Yeah.
But, I always alluded to, if you go out to a restaurant, you have a bad experience, you probably tell someone pretty quickly. If you have a great experience, you're just like, that was a good experience. You might come out in passing. I like to think it's the same thing to your point with any concerns or, something that's not settling right. So you do tend to hear and see the fire more than you see the love,
right.
And to your point, that is concerning. When that happens, it means that they're not on the same page. Now, a player is always going to protect their health, their longevity, so on and so forth. But when a medical staff says, hey, you're clear, and that guy's like, I need another minute. In certain scenarios, especially players with new teams, it's not always a great sign.
Right.
So I think you're spot on with that take, and it's a very good one to keep in mind as we go through these next few weeks.
We need to take one more break, but I did forget about a rookie quarterback. I want to ask you about Bo Nix and that running back or that quarterback room in Denver. If anybody in the YouTube chat has any questions about anything that's going on, breaking news, hopefully breaking news, training camp battles that you want to ask Matt about, we should have a little bit of time for that also. We'll be right back after this break.
Mark number 1, high speeds across the board. Time has come to decide the top team of the year. The battle is on.
So we do have another rookie quarterback. My apologies to Bo Nix. I actually think like he was obviously a lower end prospect than the guys that we've talked about so far. And for fantasy purposes, we're not quite as excited about him as we are the other guys. The lowest ranked guy, but maybe one of the more likely to start week 1. Is that kind of what we're hearing out of Denver, that Bo Nix is looking pretty good?
I mean, Sean Payton seems to love him.
Yeah.
And it's funny. I actually have put up like them in an order of, I thought Nix would be the most likely to start out of those back 3.
Yeah.
You know, part of that is, former Patriot Jared Stidham sitting in front of him doesn't exactly inspire hope. So, I do expect him to struggle early, struggle often. And when that happens, you almost have to take the chance. And if Payton's telling the truth, which he actually decently does, he loves this kid. He said he's one of the smartest QBs he's been around. I mean, granted, he spent 90% of his time with Drew Brees,
right?
But I don't know if that's a slight at Drew Brees or whatever. But you need the intelligence. You need to be able to understand the playbook, understand those calls, those formations, everything as a rookie. So if that's all true, I think the leash is even shorter for Stidham. So I do see Bo Nix starting sooner than later in Denver.
I like that. I like that. We do have a couple questions here in the chat, and I'm putting you on the spot here because I know I didn't ask you about these guys specifically, but like Joe's question, I'm actually going to answer, but I'm going to ask you a question about the situation first.
Sure.
So the question is, what's the dynasty outlook on Ayuk if he stays versus goes to Pittsburgh or Washington? I don't think I would like him going to Pittsburgh or Washington as much as I like him in San Francisco. So it would be worse for me. But it just seems to me like, is Brandon Ayuk just trolling the 49ers or trolling fans? Or do you think there's actually a decent chance that he's playing for the Steelers or Commanders or somebody else this year as opposed to the 49ers?
I feel like more times than not, you run into these scenarios that if the guy does leave, it's to neither team that anyone has linked him to. And it's almost to your point. The 49ers are like, we don't want to play these games. You're under contract with us. We're going to do what we need to do that's best for the football team. Now, I do 100% agree that if he stays in San Francisco, it is probably for the best. Kittle's getting older. Ayuk's got a bright future in front of him. Right. It's, I'm not worried about, any rookie coming in. I'm not worried about Jennings. But could he be super productive in certain scenarios in the NFL on QB needy teams? Yeah, absolutely. And there's probably teams that would pay for him. And would have no problem doing so. But if it's those 3 teams, I'm all in on the 49ers as well.
Yeah. So we've got we kind of talked about this earlier in the show. Angus says, any news on the Denver running backs and how that will shape up? And the answer, but from what I've seen, and you can tell me if you've seen something that you believe more than other things, is yes. All of the news and basically everyone is going to be the number 1 running back for the Broncos, and nobody is going to be the number 1 running back for the Broncos.
Oh yeah, I would say that's a very fair statement. Now I will say, and I'm putting this out into the space, so I might have to die on this hill, but I do believe that there is something going on with Javonte Williams in terms of maybe him not seeing, that RB1 usage that we want. I do think, and I can't remember who said it, but we were talking about it earlier, the whole McLaughlin thing, looking at the best running back in shorts. He still had a lot of explosive plays last year, but you don't go out and then go get Audric Estime if you're not going to do something with him. Like, it's almost like he's the insurance policy, right, to Javonte Williams, because McLaughlin's not sliding into an RB1 role if Williams comes off. He's just not built for that. Heck, I even like Blake Watson, which is, I can't even believe the name's coming up currently, but that's a fun taxi name if you got a spot. But yeah, I do believe there's where there's smoke, there's fire with Javonte Williams. And I wouldn't be shocked if that backfield was just an absolute disaster this year.
Yeah. Throw a dart, pick your favorite Denver running back, and then you'll probably wish you hadn't. Just take a cheap one. We had a Geno Smith question in the chat, and I've seen a couple of rumblings, but they weren't from beat writers, that there may actually be an actual quarterback competition in Seattle. Do you expect Geno to be the clear starting quarterback, or could there be a battle there between him and Sam Howell?
Listen, I like Sam Howell. Clearly has some grit to him, right? The guy he's done it when he's needed to do it to a degree, but I think Geno Smith's your starter. I don't know how you can go away from what we've seen now. I think Seattle, after this season, things are going to start to change up there significantly. I could see, obviously all that. We're talking on a 1-year basis here. I know, again, we're on a dynasty show, but Geno Smith this year, and then who knows after that.
I think Geno fits, even though he's not quite as old, fits into that Rodgers, probably Cousins group of, like, if you're a contender and playing this year, then you can value him as a QB2, but you probably shouldn't expect anything beyond the 2024 season, at least with him as a starter, or maybe even a starter anywhere. I'm going to have to let you go because somebody else in the chat tells us that we had breaking Cordero Patterson news that he's going to be more involved than people would like. And of course he is, because he's with Arthur Smith, which is exactly what we want. We got one more. Any talk you've heard at all about the Chargers wide receiver? Somebody asking who will be the wide receivers in 2 wide receiver sets. I know they said they were going to use Quentin Johnston in a different way. That's a good idea. But how are they feeling about their wide receivers in Los Angeles?
I mean, I married into a UT family, so I've watched Josh Palmer for a long time.
Yeah.
I actually really like the kid. Do I think that they have a true wide receiver 1 on this roster? No. Quentin Johnson is not a true wide receiver 1. There's all this talk, probably from about a month ago, about how Ladd McConkey is going to be the wide receiver 1. The guy runs amazing routes. He's not built necessarily to be a wide receiver 1. A double team on Ladd McConkey would probably not be his best day in the office.
Right.
But is he going to get open? Is he going to have opportunity? Yeah. I think we're also going to see a tight end emerge that actually turns into someone serviceable from this team this year. And right now it's kind of gross. It's Will Disley, Hayden Hurst, Donald Parham is your incumbent.
Somebody's about to type Stone Smart in all caps in the chat, because every time we mention the Chargers, that happens. But so yeah, he's probably on the team still.
But yes, are we going to have a guy that just absolutely takes over? No. Are we going to have some pretty good wide receiver output because we know they're tied to Justin Herbert? Absolutely. We're going to see more ground game than we probably ever have seen coming out of San Diego. And, I think, I don't want to say famously, but Austin Eckler said he couldn't stay there because it was just too much running for him.
That's right.
He had to get out of Dodge. So, if that's the route that we're expecting, yeah, we'll see a decrease in the passing game. There's definitely intriguing scenarios on the running back. I know that wasn't on a running back room. I know that wasn't a question, but if I had to pick a guy who leads the Chargers this year in receiving yards, I'm going Josh Palmer.
Josh Palmer. I think that's the right bet. Well, we will let you go so you can go write about Cordero Patterson. But I thank you for coming on, Matt. Again, it's Matt Olson, 32 beat writers. Just tell everybody else what you've got working, where they can find you.
Yeah, so our biggest spot is on Twitter, X, whatever we want to call it nowadays, at 32 beat writers. We also have our website that's relatively new to us, 32beatwriters.com, where I alluded to it earlier. The off season's our bread and butter. We're actually just went live this morning, a feature on there where you can pick your players and actually track their exact off season news. So if there's people you want to specifically watch, we're going to categorize that all for you and kind of show you those patterns and timelines to actually make you or help you make that good decision. So Heath, I appreciate you having me on, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Harry. Thank you to everybody who was active in the chat, gave us some questions there. Appreciate everybody listening to the podcast. We will talk to you next Tuesday.